So the theme of this award was really a mirror to our conference theme. So hopefully some of you made it to our conference last year, which was all about putting collections data to work. So the whole point of the award is to highlight these often unsung achievements of people who work with collections that lie at the heart of museums. So we had submissions this year that covered putting collections data to work in the context of things like rethinking cataloguing and a more inclusive approach to cataloguing. We also had submissions looking at how we can make legacy collections data work harder using things like new technology and crowdsourcing. So we had a real range of submissions on this topic. On the next slide, just going to give you a summary of who those submissions were. So we had 8 submissions this year. And our panel of 3 judges did a short list of 3. And those are the 3 museums that you'll be hearing from today. Each of them will present for around 10-15 minutes, and then we'll hear the announcement of who has won the Collections Trust Award this year. So I'm going to hand over to Louise, our first of our panel of judges, who is going to introduce our first presentation. Apologies, these are the 3 shortlisted. We have Royal Armouries, Cromarty Courthouse Museum, Fishbourne Roman Palace, and we're going to hear from them in order. So I'm just going to hand over to Louise now.
So the first nominee is the Royal Armouries, based in Leeds, but the project is a partnership between the Royal Armouries, which is actually the UK's national collection of arms and armour, and also one of the oldest museums in the world, and a multidisciplinary team of academics from Sheffield, York and Cambridge. I'm going to hand over to Mark Bennett, Research Manager, to run us through the project. Thank you, Mark.
No, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone out there in the ether for coming along. I think everybody's understandably excited about the potential of artificial intelligence. There are many sectors in which the widespread use of AI offers the potential for a quantum shift in capacity. Given how the heritage sector has been underfunded and perhaps, dare I say, undervalued over the past few decades, it's entirely understandable that we might seize on the opportunities offered by AI. In particular, many institutions face the prospects of decades of cataloguing before the majority of their collection reaches minimum standard. Under those circumstances, the use of AI tools become very attractive. If AI can be used to identify and tag images, as it has at the National Museum of the Royal Navy, or add alt text, as it has done at the London Museum, then surely it's only a matter of time before it starts to be used more comprehensively to generate cataloguing data. Instead of decades, we could see baseline catalogue entries for entire collections generated in weeks or months. Indeed, the Towards a National Collection programme, funded to the tune of almost £20 million by UK Research Innovation, has called for museums to open records to various forms of automated and collective enrichment and unlock the generative potential of AI to create new data in real time. Nevertheless, any new technology runs the risk of outstripping both the ethical and legal frameworks around their use. That's one of the reasons that the Arts and Humanities Research Council funded the Bridging Responsible AI Divides programme, or BRAID for short, which was intended to help accelerate some of the thinking around the ways in which AI might be used ethically. And that's where we came in. So, as mentioned, the Royal Armouries is the UK's national collection of arms and armour. We actually started life as the royal stockpile of military material held at the Tower of London just after the Norman Conquest. Between roughly the 16th century and the mid-19th century, we're simultaneously a functioning arsenal that marshalled the power of the British state and a tourist attraction. After the Crimean War, which I hasten to add was not entirely our fault, we shed the functional aspects and became just a museum. For those who aren't familiar with the museum, we feature objects from across the globe, from Japan, North Africa, the Middle East, China, and of course India. That Indian collection really got its start with 3 major tranches of material from the mid-19th century. The first was a gift from the East India Company intended to showcase the martial power of the recently defeated Sikhs and Afghans. The second was material intended to urge the British craftsman to up his game and purchased by us from the Great Exhibition. And the third were objects seized in the aftermath of the Indian Rebellion of 1857. These tranches sparked a drive for collecting that has lasted beyond the colonial era, and I should emphasise that the colonial part of the collection is only the nucleus of a much larger body of Indian material that we hold. When the BRAID call came round, we were already in contact with an existing research centre, the Centre for Drones and Culture. They had an interdisciplinary team from computer scientists and digital culture specialists to political historians. And so we're confident that they could provide insight into the pitfalls of AI if they were only given a suitable test case. Now, for our part, we were already somewhat concerned about the foundations on which AI might build. We are very aware that history is written by the winners because much of our collection consists of the things that we used to win. We know a great deal about this armour of Henry VIII on the left. Not only do we know the owner, which is a rarity in our collection, but we suspect it was decorated by Giovanni di Maiano, and we know that by the 18th century, female visitors used to stick pins in the lining of the codpiece in the hope that this would enhance their fertility. However, compare this exceptional royal armour to this dagger in the centre. Almost every adult male in medieval England carried one of these daggers on a daily basis. And yet most of what we know about them is what the authorities cared about. We know in 1388 and again in 1597 that men below the rank of gentlemen were banned from carrying them, even though this had very little effect. We also know in 1348 there were complaints that women were wearing these daggers on their belts, and presumably again very little was done about it. Likewise, the taking of trophies almost inevitably cuts an object off from its cultural heritage. These breastplates you see at the base of our Hall of Steel were captured from the French in the 1620s and have been trophies far longer than they were functional objects. We have to rely on other scholarship about French society, economics, and the military to set them in their proper context. Power disparities, therefore, mean that the data that we hold about our collection is incomplete. And this is all the more true in the colonial sphere than in the medieval one. In the era of empire, knowledge was a tool of control. The suppression of indigenous forms of knowledge, such as traditional medicines, and their replacement with Western forms was a vital part of rendering a colonial population tractable. Where indigenous knowledge was recorded, it was often done so by Western writers who interpreted and interpolated what they learned and were writing more for the benefit of other Western scholars than with the intent of preserving a particular body of cultural heritage. These Indian objects arrived in a country with very little knowledge of Indian arms and armour or Indian martial culture. They were exotic, they were oriental, but they were really little more than that. Sadly, the first tranche actually seems to have arrived with detailed notes from the East India Company, stating with minute exactness the places where they were made and the races by whom they had been used, but which, as far as we can tell, only survive in a few chance remarks in a very early catalogue of ours. Furthermore, in the aftermath of the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British seized and destroyed existing arms wherever they could lay their hands on them, a process that you see depicted on the slide here. Some objects, but not very many, were left, and a much larger body of socially constructed, uncodified knowledge about those weapons and their role in society was lost. We therefore agreed to submit a joint proposal that would focus on our Indian collection, and the AHRC very kindly smiled on it. The timescales were relatively tight, which meant that we had to be fast-moving and above all open. We shared detailed data from our collections management system on which the team could perform analytics about the quality of data that might be available for AI processing. However, we also walked through all the other sources of data that feed into the catalogue, which in our case includes the traditional paper catalogues or the blue books, which are not yet digitised. Finally, we were honest about what we saw was the limitation of sources. We were willing to acknowledge that despite the significant contributions of Western scholars of arms and armour, there was a much wider body of knowledge that they were unaware of and had no access to. From this observation leads to the significant risk that cataloguing objects based on existing data perpetuates inadequacies and inequalities given the source of that information. Secondly, although it's possible to bolt on an AI interface to data in a catalogue and to present the information that it relays as coming from the Indian maker or the owner of the objects in question, ultimately what you're doing by doing that is to put colonial words in someone else's mouth. While the project was running, we hosted a workshop at the museum which had around 50 attendees, including academics, digital storytellers, AA practitioners, and delegates from local, regional, national museums. Some of this session focused on AI literacy. For instance, the cost in energy and fresh water of processing vast amount of data, the extent to which services which are often billed as AI are actually manually processed by people in the developing world on incredibly low salaries, that sort of stuff, with the rest of it focusing on the specific pitfalls of working with colonial collections. And since the end of the fieldwork, the project's initial findings have been part of a UK parliamentary showcase, as well as cited in an internal UNESCO report. If you're interested to find out more, the major output from the project will be a toolkit that can be freely downloaded and will feature principles for the use of AI, drawn from the Armoury's case study, but will apply across the sector. It should also help suggest means of navigating other issues with collections data that arise from similar asymmetries of power, not just race, but class and gender, which obviously applies across our collection too. Now, the toolkit is just coming to the design phase, but it should hopefully be available shortly. It will be on our website for download, and we will probably launch it more comprehensively. Now, I appreciate that in a contest about putting data to work, we have in fact largely been focused on the ways in which data may not or should not work. However, being involved in the project really challenged us to think about how much we take for granted in our own data. It's been a very valuable milestone in our efforts to manage our collection and their associated data in a more conscious and ethical way. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. So our next presentation will be by Freya Samuel from Cromarty Courthouse Museum. And originally, Samantha Johnson, our trustee, was going to introduce this, but she's just having a bit of a connection issue. But luckily, she did send me her note. So I'm going to read this out on behalf of Samantha, our trustee. So what was striking about this application was the use of remote volunteers to play a significant role in the collections data processing project. Museum and collections have historically lent towards being gatekeepers of collections data and information, and projects like this demonstrate how we are moving towards a new era, which is exciting. It was inspiring to read the application, and we look forward to hearing details about the practicalities of setting up a team of remote volunteers so that we can all learn from their experience. So I'm now going to hand over to Freya Samuel, who is going to take us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So just to introduce a little bit about Cromarty Courthouse Museum, we're located on the Black Isle in the Scottish Highlands, and our museum is housed in an 18th century courthouse building. Our collection spans archaeology, social history, including Fisher town life, Gallic history, as well as architectural history, numismatics, legal history, World War I and World War II. So our project, as you can see on the screen, was called Democratising Data, Creating Opportunities for Remote Digitisation Volunteers. And apologies for the very lengthy title on that one, but it does quite neatly summarise exactly what we were doing. So the project set out to digitise all of the museum's object records with the aim of creating a publicly accessible online CMS on our platform eHive. A key aim of this project was also to create remote volunteering opportunities, which would in turn democratise the digitisation process by inviting external stakeholders to contribute to data categorisation and processing. To give a little bit of background to the data situation at Cromarty Courthouse, our collections data was spread between several different sources, and we were able to share access to all of these sources with our remote volunteers. The starting point of the project was a very well documented accession register dating back to 1900, and approximately 400 records that had already been uploaded onto eHive but had been categorised quite inconsistently. Other data sources included the Digital Museum of the Highlands and digitized objects on the Tor app Smartify. We also knew that the collection had around 4,000 objects, but we had no centralised database to store all of this information. So why did we decide to recruit remote volunteers to help us with this project? There were two main reasons. So number one, it would create accessible work experience for people wanting to contribute to collections management processes. And number two, it would provide a crucial external perspective to the data categorization process. By allowing multiple perspectives into this process, it creates also more searchable records for a CMS. If only one person is responsible for cataloguing and categorizing data, the search will only be reflective of one person's thought process. So by asking multiple external stakeholders to take part and get involved, the data becomes much more representative of the thinking of a broad range of people. And this is the essence of democratizing data. So the concept of remote volunteering is supported by crowdsourced data creation, and this interpretation fosters transparency and accountability in the curation of museum data. With volunteers helping to enrich and update digital collections, the process becomes more open, ensuring that digital archives are continuously improved by a wide network of contributors. And this collaborative model also encourages trust and public engagement in cultural preservation. So in terms of the process, we recruited volunteers online and we received 67 applications, which for a very small museum with a current staff of 1.5, we were really, really thrilled about all those people who were keen to get involved. But due to the actual quantity of data we had, we ended up working with 12 of these remote volunteers. As an induction to the task, I created a volunteer handbook that they could read and refer back to, and you can sort of broadly see this on the screen. And this contained important information for their work, like the data categories and troubleshooting information. Each volunteer was assigned a data set in the form of a spreadsheet of around 50 objects. They were tasked with filling out 12 data fields for each of these objects. Some of the fields included things like brief and public descriptions, which encouraged volunteers to dig into information offered by the object title and undertake further research, as well as tagging fields, which are used to group and identify objects like collection type and classification, as well as more general information like location, item count, and acquisition notes. Next slide, please. Volunteers were given, this is a really lovely visual slide there for you. Volunteers were given 12 weeks to complete their data sets. And once completed, all of this data was collated into a primary spreadsheet, which kind of acted as an interim CMS for us, which totaled 1,124 records with a total of 4,235 objects detailed. And you can sort of see that very base spreadsheet there on the screen. Next slide. So in terms of outcomes for this project, the volunteers successfully completed all of the assigned data sets, making important and nuanced decisions about data categorization and descriptions. The project also acted as an opportunity for remote volunteers to build skills and confidence with collections management, which will positively impact personal and professional development. We wanted to create genuine opportunities for participatory access to our collection. And as such, remote volunteering played a pivotal role by increasing accessibility, inclusivity, and participation. This project encouraged volunteers from all over the country to contribute to preserving and sharing cultural heritage, regardless of their geographic, financial, or physical barriers. By opening digitisation to remote volunteers, we sought to break down some of the power that's held by museums that also act as barriers to access. So ultimately, the project was very successful and attracted a huge amount of interest, and we were delighted to have built connections with so many skilled and enthusiastic remote volunteers. Our collections have now been fully digitised. The success of that particular project, which took place at the end of last year, led to another in-house volunteer project to photograph the collections, which took place across January and February, just gone. And this provided another valuable experience for 2 in-person volunteers to learn about object photography, object handling, and digital asset management. The in-house volunteers of that project were able to photograph, edit, and create images for 109 objects records as a result of the work undertaken by our remote volunteers. So it wouldn't have been possible to get to that stage without them. And just onto the last slide. So all of our data, all of those thousands of lines of data and the subsequent images that were taken of our collection have now been uploaded to our account on eHive, meaning that we have a publicly accessible collections management system featuring every accessioned object in the Cromarty Courthouse Museum collection. And if you use eHive or just want to have a little browse online, I encourage you to take a look at our collections because it's something that we're really proud to now have and be able to share with the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Freya. So our final of our 3 presentations will be by Rob Simmons from the Fishbourne Roma Palace, and Rob is going to be introduced by our final judge, Ruth Sloss. Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, Sarah. We felt that this project was a great example of making existing collections data work harder to achieve entirely new information and insights. It also preserved multiple different sources of data, uncovered data that previously had been thought lost, safeguarding that data for future use, and it added on a new layer of geographical data to give those new insights. We admired how the solution didn't require anything fancy or expensive or bespoke. Instead, it used open source free software And it created a framework that can incorporate and manage new data ongoing and be accessed by researchers anywhere in the world. So to tell you more about it, I will pass over to Rob.
Ruth, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to assume everybody can hear me. I'm Rob Simmons. I'm the curator down at Fishbourne Roman Palace. That's probably enough about me. The much more important people for this project were 3 students who did all of the work for it. The thing is, I don't have the expertise or the time to deliver a project like this, and unfortunately, our crack team of students did. We have Keir Broughton and Georgina Buckland, who are both undergraduates from Bournemouth University, and Miles Clifford, who I think is on this call, is a PhD student from Reading University, and they absolutely did all of the heavy lifting. I calculated the project took probably about 10 months full-time work to deliver. So thanks to them. Now, about Fishbourne, this is us. We're down near the south coast. I think the strap line is the largest domestic Roman building north of the Alps, in fact, bigger than Buckingham Palace, a very, very large structure, early Roman structure, consisting of, as you can see on the slide there, 4 wings built around a big formal garden. It was excavated in the 1960s, and it's now a museum and visitor centre. You can come and visit. Please do. You'd be very welcome. And if you did visit, you would meet our mosaics. This is what we're famous for. This is one of the 29 mosaics. Obviously, I obviously chose the nicest one. It's a famous Cupid on the dolphin floor. Like I say, one of 29, and they're mosaics, and they're lovely. What's more lovely, in my opinion, are our collections. Not quite so famous for our collections, but this is a resource that constitutes, it consists of all of the archaeological finds found from within 1 mile of the palace since 1960. I reckon we've got about 300,000 objects in that collection there, spread across about 3,000 boxes, and housed in the top right there, you can see we have a bespoke collections store. And the collections have supported, since I started about 19 years ago, 450 separate research projects. So you can see what we've got here is a really powerful and valuable research tool. The reason it's such a powerful research tool is because, so unsurprisingly, the collection is supported by a really rich foundation of collections data. And it's everything you might expect. We've got the original excavation records from the 1960s. We've got our digital catalogue, our modes catalogue. We have photographs, we have drawings, we have publications, and we've got a sort of raft of specialist data which has come out of some of these 450 research projects that I mentioned. So sort of like specialist identification type data. So we know for each object, we know what it is, we know its size, its shape, mundane things, its color, potentially where it was made, has been published, the kind of things you'd expect to find on a modes catalogue. Where is it in the store? Has it been studied before? But also, thanks to our specialists, to our researchers, we might have some chemical information that you wouldn't normally expect, or sort of bizarre information like it's a bone. Has it been butchered? What does the butchery look like, and what does that mean? In addition to all that sort of object-based data, we've got a lot of information about the find spot. If something was found, every object has got a number written on it, which relates to its find spot. And using the top left there, the trench notebooks, we can interrogate those to find out what that find spot meant. Is it a pit? Is it a ditch? Is it a grave or a rubbish dump? So thanks to all of this, we can ask quite sort of, well, I'm going to say sophisticated. You won't believe me. This is where it gets ultra nerdy. But we could ask of our collections, can we look at all the pits, all the Roman pits? Have they got bones in? And does the average size of bone fragment in each pit vary? And how does that vary across the site? Okay, that might sound like a really odd thing to want to know. But if you're an archaeologist, we get mad for this kind of question. This will tell us stuff about how the site was formed and potentially even how the site was cleaned by the Romans. You know, with different areas being cleaned in different ways, and what does that tell us about the way different spaces were being used? So we can get to this data, but unfortunately, because we're dealing with often paper records, we're dealing with modes that doesn't talk to access, we're dealing with sort of random spreadsheets that were created 10, 15 years ago. None of these forms of data actually talk to each other. So to get that kind of information about how the site was cleaned, it would take months and months of work. And as a result, it doesn't get done. We can't and don't ask those questions. So that's our problem. I've just laid it out for you. You know, we've got the data, but we can't really search it in a very sophisticated way. We've got a mixture of digital and analog data. We do have sort of spatial data, but it's not really, interrogating that data is more art than science. It really is. We have a lack of digital backup. Our analog records, our paper records, and especially the drawn records, the site plans, we didn't have digital backups for those, which is actually quite that's the kind of thing you lose sleep at night, trust me. And also, if you want to interrogate any of this data, because it's spread all over the site physically, you know, in different buildings sometimes, you've got to visit if you want to ask your question about how the site was cleaned and the size of those pits. But we do have an additional problem that's not on that slide, is there's a really bothersome lack of chronological information. So, you know, take our pits example, say we could work out how cleaning was varying across the site. Wouldn't it just be so much more interesting to see if that varied through time? And what does that tell us? Does that tell us that, you know, that there's been a change in the use of the space, or an economic change, and people aren't looking after the place as much? You know, you can, with chronological data, you really add this sort of third dimension. So the solution, that's the problem. The solution, first and foremost, was to digitize those notebooks that we just saw. And that immediately started to create our digital backup. So that's one of our problems that's been solved. And in doing so, and this was one of the best days of my career for the last 5 or 10 years, we found this. Wow, this is the chronological data that we never knew was there. I've been told it existed, but I'd assumed it wasn't on site and had been lost. But it doesn't look like much, but trust me, this tells us the approximate date of every single archaeological deposit on the site. So well, that alone made the entire project worth doing, in my opinion. And then we've solved that other problem of lack of chronological information. We took our digitized notebooks and our digitized site plans, and we created a floor plan of the palace, a digital floor plan of the palace. And then you can see we've got our 4 wings built around our formal garden. That's what the palace looks like in plan. And over that, we can now start to, and I won't get into the ins and outs of how we actually did this. I say we, all of this was Miles here, and I was in my office while this was going on. But we can overlay the locations, the relative locations of all of the archaeological features on the site. Now, I mentioned earlier on, all of our objects have got a number on it that relates to where they were found. They relate to the archaeological feature. So if we know that that coin X was found in pit number 73, we now know where pit number 73 is in relation to the floor plan of the palace. So we can then plot where it came from, where it was found on that plan. So we straight away are able to start pulling together all of this data from different data sets into one place, and we start plotting them in one place. So that dispersal of our data is starting to disappear. To do this, we used QGIS, Geographical Information System. Most important thing about that is it's free. And you can download it. I am not even remotely an expert. I can assure you that Miles is. And yeah, we couldn't have done this without his expertise. But because it's free, we can then, it's possible, you don't need £1,000 worth of software to use this tool. So I can stick the whole tool, which consists of very many files, in a folder, and we transfer it around the world, and people can fire it up and start asking their own questions without having to come to Fishbourne. So that we've solved that last problem of people having to come onto site to interrogate the data set. This is the first, this is super nerdy, I don't apologize, this was brilliant fun to do. Okay, this is the first query that we carried out. I'm almost embarrassed to admit it. It's a heat map of where the chicken bones from Fishbourne Roman Palace were found, overlaid on top of the floor plan of the building. And okay, what a weird thing to want to do. But immediately, top left-hand corner there, you can see it's like Chickenopolis. There's you're ankle deep in chicken bones here. This is actually quite a significant finding. I won't bore you with why, but chickens were, in the Roman period, considered deities, and to find, such a concentration of them in one place is surely significant. And there in the top right-hand corner of the courtyard garden, there's another little bit of a spike as well, and nobody was expecting that. I'd be quite interested to find out what that's all about. We can interrogate the database to find out more. And I only realized while putting this presentation together that the east wing, so the wing on the left, sorry, that's the west wing, the wing on the left, chicken bones seem to respect it. There's no chicken being eaten in the west wing. What's that all about? No. But we couldn't have answered any of these questions or asked any of these questions without this tool. So it's a fabulously valuable tool. Really, this is just a start. We can now start to overlay any information, any new data that has any sort of spatial element to it. So air photography, we can now start to see where finds are coming from in relation to the modern landscape. We can even upload sort of conservation information on mosaics. Are there cracks, salt, are there any algal blooms, any algal growth? We can map that and see how that is changing through time as well. Condition monitoring, the light levels at different times of the day, different parts of the site, we can start putting that on here. It's not archaeology, this is about museums now. This isn't about boring, Roman archaeology nerdy stuff. But anything, absolutely anything with a spatial element can be loaded onto this system, and the system will act as a way of organizing that data, making it accessible, and sort of curating it for future, if you like. So that's where we're at the moment. We have next steps since we in the last couple of 3 weeks really. We're starting to talk. Well, I sent a copy of the tool of the GIS to somebody. I have no idea where he lives, but it's 880 megabytes, so it's quite a big file. But he's using it to start to create a 3D digital reconstruction of the palace itself. So that's just a completely random spin-off of one of the things we can do with this model now that we have it. We're talking to Bournemouth University again. Hopefully they're going to do a geophysics project, and their geophysical data can now go onto our GIS tool, and we can see where chicken bones are coming from in relationship to geophysical anomalies. Somebody somewhere is going to do a dissertation on that one there, no doubt. And in a couple of weeks, we have a student from Newcastle, a PhD student from Newcastle, coming down to the site. She's looking at our window glass, and she's going to start creating a huge amount of new information about window glass, including chemical information, and that can all be loaded onto this, and we'll be able to see the distribution of window glass and window glass with different chemistries around the site and at different time periods, and what does that tell us about the evolution of the site, and were they recycling, and where were they recycling? Things like that is all possible. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Rob. And I'm now going to hand over to one of our judges, Louise, who is going to announce the winner. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you. Well, it was an incredibly tough decision, as all the submissions were worthy of note, and we really truly appreciate the number of hours that go into any form of collections management project. However, the judges were particularly interested in the award criteria of really putting legacy collections data to work to better understand and reshape collections to become more meaningful and inclusive. So based on this award criteria, we are delighted to announce the winner of the 2024 Collections Trust Award is the Royal Armouries. Have a quick round. So the judges felt this project is an excellent example of making legacy collections data work harder in a more ethical and conscious way by using new technology and helping extend its reach not only to a variety of users, but to widely benefit the sector as a whole. And certainly with the publication of the online toolkit, many institutions will benefit moving forward and help sort of future-proof their collections. So may I hand over to Mark just to say a few words about his team and the project, and then come back to me, Mark, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, rather than I've probably bored people with the project, but I would like to say a few acknowledgements, if that's okay. So thank you to everyone at the museum, obviously, who contributed to the project. Thank you ultimately to the project team who actually brought the thought leadership that made it work and helped us look at our collection in a new way. But congratulations to everyone who entered. You know, I said the sector was undervalued, but this is really an indication of just how much hard work is going in, not just by the people here, but by the wider teams of volunteers behind it. And thank you to the Collections Trust for the work that they're doing to help correct that undervaluing.
Thank you, Mark. And we are also delighted to announce two highly commended projects, and in no particular order, the Cromarty Courthouse Museum and the Fishbourne Roman Palace are amazing projects. A huge congratulations to all involved, and thank you to everyone who submitted these incredible projects. The winning museum will receive £1,000 to spend on an agreed collections management activity, and all the museums will receive an award certificate and have their case studies published on the Collections Trust website with further marketing opportunities if they're willing. So thank you everyone for your time. Have a great evening. And I think we will come off mute and just do a short round of applause. I can't bear that not having any clapping.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.